Another Earth Day. I'm glad it falls on a Sunday. I think that's really nice. And so we remember the importance, the beauty of our physical planet, and all of the diversity that it has to offer us. And of course, when we approach this as Christians, we know we are also acknowledging that it is God's creation that brought this about. And of course, this part of Earth Day isn't complete until we also acknowledge that we are, unfortunately, still trying to figure out how to live in harmony and trying to find a way to live in which all of life is supported. I saw a figure that I included it in what I'd written for the banner, so I'm probably going to be a little redundant here, but this statistic kind of stayed with me. The average American has a 30-acre footprint, and if everyone lived as we do, we would need 5 more planets to support human existence. So something is out of balance here in a huge way. We consume so much, and I wonder why. Why do we feel like we need to have so much? I was trying to go over my notes this morning. I'm sitting in where the office is at our house, and it's also the playroom. And while I'm thinking about this, Mom's laughing because she knows what's there. Seeing all of these toys, which they play with, but do we need to have so much when some have so little, And so I think that's this isn't a question I really followed up with today as far as why, but I think that would be really a good one to think about. Why do we consume so much? And part of it, I can't help but think, is just our standard of living. We're just used to it. I mean, we grew up, or I know for me anyway, I grew up with stuff. I mean, we were never worried about where our next meal was coming from or anything like that. We had plenty to play with. But I think the danger of it is we don't really think, that's just my opinion, that's just where I'm coming from, but it's easy not to think about where things come from and the process that they go to get to our home or our plate or whatever it is. For instance, I just learned a pair of jeans. Do you have any idea how much water it takes to make one pair of jeans? It can take at least 1,500 gallons of water. Now, I heard 2,900 gallons of water as well, but the lowest figure was 1,500 gallons of water to produce 1.5 pounds of cotton used to make a single pair of jeans. When we think about water and how this is going to be a huge issue, it already is, and it took that much water to make this one pair of jeans. And if you think about the mall. Think how many pairs of jeans are sitting there. All the malls across America. How many jeans are in everybody's closet? That is a lot of water. And I didn't even think about that as a part of what I'm buying. And one thing I read, someone said we could think about our place in the world as kind of 2 different identities. We have an ecological identity and we have a consumer identity. Now, this is just one way of looking at it. Our ecological identity is the way that we understand where we live. It's our environmental concerns and values like respect, compassion, reverence for life. It's what influences how we relate to the earth and the degree to which we make environmentally conscious choices. So that's one part of our identity. And then kind of on the opposite spectrum, or opposite end of the spectrum, is what I heard called consumer identity. So this is brand name preferences, material possessions, class status, market desires. Is tied to purchasing behavior. So when consumer identity flourishes, our ecological identity diminishes. Sort of they kind of go back and forth. So environmental concerns have been at the fore for a long time now. And I think we've all can imagine, like when we've been buying things, there's kind of a resistance that we've all, I think, sort of developing, do I need this? How long is it going to last? Should I buy it? Kind of a resistance to just buying. But it's interesting we've been trying to resist this for a long time. So what I was reading about, kind of interesting to me, is that like the New England colonists, the Puritans, kind of came with their religious beliefs. And they believed in terms of consuming that it should never be an end in itself, and that if we consume too much, it would get in the way of our being able to develop as spiritually good people. Now, the Quakers, another long tradition, have had the standpoint that that excessive choice is extravagant and unnecessary. So you think this is a whole different way of trying to fit into the world. I mean, think about every year there's new model of car. So that kind of Quaker thinking is more like, if it's not going to last, why am I going to buy it? Right? But that's not necessarily where we are. I mean, we consider it, or at least it's kind of become the right thing, that we need to have choices. And think how many things are disposable. Cups, paper, plates, everything is up for being disposable. And so, the question is, where do we fall in all of this? And my thought is, we live in a society, you have to be a consumer, and in some ways, and we also want to try and develop our ecological identity. So my thought is, where do they meet for us? And how do we approach where we are in the world and what we have to buy to get along in the world? Where do those two things meet for us? And should we, as Christians, have a certain perspective that we bring with us when we are buying? Now, this is kind of a more practical kind of Sunday. Earth Day is kind of like that, I think. We can talk about our love for the earth and talk about how we want to take care of it. But also, it matters what we do. What we buy makes a statement. And so normally I'm not about recommending necessarily anything to buy, but I thought just for this morning, I'd just bring up a few examples. And if you notice on the cover of your bulletin, it's about food. So this morning we're going to kind of limit that a little bit. And it says something on there. It says, from soil to spoon. How does our food go from soil to spoon? I think, this is being a rural community. It's easy to know for a lot here how that works exactly. I mean, the purest, the simplest, shortest process is your own garden. You plant a seed, it grows, it's ripe enough, it's time to eat it, you throw it in the dinner pot at dinner, and that's about as quick as it can be, I think. But then I thought, but what about when we go to a grocery store? I mean, we can't grow everything. I don't know, has anybody here ever been able to never have to go to a grocery store and grow everything yourself? Right? So we go to the grocery store and we have this luxury of having everything available to us. It doesn't matter the time of year. There's how many choices. But then I was thinking, how much do we really know about what soil to spoon means when we go to the grocery store and pick up something off of the shelf? So I mentioned I had just a couple of examples this morning, and I hope you don't mind. The first one is sweet or bittersweet, you could say. So I have here a bowl of chocolates. Now, we consume 11 somewhat not everyone here, averages 11 pounds of chocolate a year. A person does. Now, Halloween and Easter are the really big times that we consume all of this chocolate. Now, does anyone know where most of your chocolate comes from?
A bean.
Bean, right. What about geographically in the world? Does anyone have an idea? Well, 70 to 75% of the chocolate that we consume is grown on small farms in West Africa, including the Ivory Coast. And conventionally grown chocolate, if you just go out to buy a Hershey bar, is one of the highest pesticide-using crops there is.
Oh my.
Yeah, so there's that part of it. But there's another piece, and that is that, now this comes from the CNN Freedom Project report. It said there are an estimated 200,000 children working the fields, many against their will, not going to school to satisfy the world's hunger for chocolate. I know, but it's really, it's sad that children are out having to do this and not being able to go to school, and they're not receiving living wages. Sometimes women aren't paid for their work. So this is just something I'm presenting, which is, sometimes I know organic, we might just think expensive. But if it says organic fair trade, it means there were no pesticides, and it means that they agreed, whoever the farms were, agreed to no child labor, and that they receive a living wage. So, even if we have to eat less, but have greater quality, I'm recommending, from the pulpit, I don't know if that's okay or not here, chocolate that says, has that sort of organic fair trade. So I'm just going to pass around chocolate today. Anybody want some? Raise a hand. And, this is fair trade, organic chocolate. So I guess the thing is, this is just, where I'm coming from and what I've been reading and learning, but it's become so obvious that environmental issues are not just strictly environmental. They're so connected and interlaced with human issues and people, and it affects the environment that people live in. Even if we don't know them, it's good to care. Okay, if anybody needs more chocolate, what's up? Okay. So I guess what I was trying to say is it becomes a justice issue. And I'll speak more about that in a second. Now the same is for coffee, and this is just, the coffee we used this morning is fair trade coffee, and it's just another example of a way that we can support farmers to have living wage and to support coffee beans with less pesticides, which is good for our system as well. Now, speaking about justice issues, there's one other issue, and this is about how our food is brought to us. How do we keep our food in the grocery store? And this is simply aluminum cans. I'm sure you've seen this maybe in the news lately. They contain a certain BPA ingredient. Have you seen that? It's something that can be harmful. It has, let me read it to you. BPA, have you ever seen the new bottles and glasses? They'll come out, they'll say BPA free on it or whatever. It's a health concern. Low doses might be linked to cancer, type 2 diabetes, and a host of other issues. And the National Council of Churches has an eco-justice program. And this has been something that they were trying to work with. And I think they tried to start a petition to ban having BPA it comes in aluminum cans. And other countries, Canada, Denmark, France, China, Malaysia, are all placing really strict guidelines about the use of BPA but our FDA decided not to do so, and so the National Council of Churches decided to issue a statement of disappointment because this is affecting God's planet, God's creatures having toxins in the environment. And a part of it that makes it a real justice issue is that the more, when hard economic times come, it's the lower class with less money buying more canned foods and consuming them, and then you have sort of becomes a class issue, higher levels of this chemical and toxin. And so that's just a couple of examples to think about. And as I said, it kind of begins to become a justice issue. And I read this week something Emanuel Swedenborg said about justice. And I liked his definition, and I wanted to share it. He said, justice is following the divine design in all that one does, and bringing back into the divine design things that have fallen away from that design. We acquire justice the more we practice it. We practice justice the more our interaction with our neighbor is motivated by a love for truth and goodness and justice. So justice is caring about creation, caring about our neighbor, and trying to bring back what is fallen away from God's plan or this divine design. And we know, God created such a beautiful planet, pure planet, and that it is part of our, we could see it as part of our regeneration process, that we care about the divine design. And if these issues are a part of it, then we can become activists in our own way. I always remember there's something Helen Keller said at the end of her life, and I couldn't quite find this particular quote, but she kind of at the end of her life was a little discouraged with the new church. And she thought that we had become aloof to social matters. And she was an activist. Despite being blind and deaf and giving all of her energy to working for others who are blind and deaf, she spoke out against capital punishment, racism, poverty. She upheld workers' rights to strike. She, of course, supported the right of women to vote. She met survivors of the atomic bomb. She was one of the first to fight against nuclear weapons. She was an activist in all these ways, and we don't normally talk about this. This is not generally part of something that we promote. We don't want to tell anybody what to do or how to think. It's certainly freedom of choice, but it's something to think about. How do our choices affect the world? And how can we make little differences even in the choices that we have? And what power do we have? And so I'd like to end with a quote from her. She said, "In our service to others, our love is made visible. In service we hear the voice of love and faith that shall at last pronounce the words of eternal life." And this comes from Matthew 25. "Well done, good and faithful servant." So that we can hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant."